a lot about developer experience, about a year in life of a developer. And I'm gonna try to tell that story through the lens of developer experience at Spotify and Backstage, which I represent. So my name is Helen Greul. I work at Spotify within platform unit, within developer productivity unit, and I lead the team that is working on Backstage developer portal. Few things about me that might convince you at least consider the things that I'm about to say is that I've been building products for developers quite a few years now, and developers have been my exclusive user group for a pretty long time. And as a manager in tech, I also do quite a bit of like pattern matching, and it seems like developer productivity problems are not that unique, and you can pretty much count them with like your fingers on one hand. Besides, I have a teenager at home. I don't know if you recognize that picture. That's a skill tree from Diablo. And as I've been like getting really deep into skill trees lately, there are quite some analogies with developer experience improvement and with developer experience journeys that a lot of companies have. And the analogy I'm trying to make is that it allows the user to see how their characters progress, and you only get access to certain stages once you progress to the next stage. So there is no shortcuts to developer productivity. It's a bit of a journey, all right? Maybe we can agree on that. Besides, my team is a big believer on developer experience needs to be accessible to everyone. Hence, a lot of work that we do happens in open source just to make it free of charge, make it accessible to everyone and anyone. So yeah, that's all I had to say, I guess, about me. That is helpful to know a little bit about how we're going to spend the next 40 minutes. We're going to look into developer experience journey that Spotify has been through as a company, and we're going to focus on some learnings and some products that emerged from it. We'll pause for a second to talk about what developer portals are, because it's a relatively new product category, so I just want to make sure we get terminology straight. And then finally, we'll get to see how this impacts the day-to-day experience of an engineer. So that's the plan. Let's do it. We often talk about user experience, but we don't frequently talk about the experience of people that build user experience, the developer experience. I was quite pleased and surprised today to hear a few more talks about it. It's usually like you don't get as many on an average conference, and today was like few bits that really made me happy and that really brought important issues of developer experience into focus. So we're seeing some progress. We're making some progress. Spotify started taking developer experience seriously about 8 years ago now. And that just happened because we've noticed some troubling trends, and development of new features was getting slower, and it was taking longer to onboard new hires. So Spotify had gone through years of hypergrowth, and with the number of developers substantially growing, but the number of components was quadrupling at the same time. It was like a really big exponential curve. And that, of course, we went from a small company to a fairly large-sized organization. There was lots of people onboarding, getting up to speed, and the organization was shifting so fast. It was hard to keep track of who owned what. We knew things were a bit chaotic, but it wasn't clear exactly how bad that was. And it was about that time. And like that was the beginning of the perfect storm, as you can see. So the curve, like the hockey stick, is the amount of services and the scale that it has grown into. And like the graph ends with 2021, and by 2021 we had like 20K services. Can you guess how many services or components Spotify has in 2024 now? Any ideas? Just shout. A little bit less. A little bit less than 50. Any other takes? 40K. Close. A bit more. 42, of course. Just like in everything's in life, 42 is the only right answer. 42 and growing. So yeah, that's the current state. So yeah, that was the beginning of the perfect storm, and we dug deeper into developer experience day to day, we took like a really intense look to, with the hope to understand what was making the life of developers harder. Because we really wanted to make it data-driven, we wanted to focus on the right things, and like 4 main problems basically emerged. So it was really, really hard to find things. There was a bunch of context switching because every now and then someone would tap you on the shoulder to ask a question and you would lose 20 minutes of your productive time and flow. And there was lack of standardization. There was this whole like wild west of components. There was like 40 UI frameworks being used, just to name one example. And of course, the infrastructure tool was growing. So that was the sort of the main 4 factors that were slowing us down. So to address these problems, we really set the direction onto creating the most effective developer experience in the world. That was the sort of the statement that we collectively agreed on and that we thought would be crucial for us as a company to survive and scale effectively. So with that, we started 2 experiments around that same time. We made an internal developer portal called Backstage, and we started a platform organization, platform team within Spotify organization. So both of those things are pretty common by now, both the developer portals and platform teams, but that back then, 8 years ago, they were still like wild experimental ideas. And it took some time for us to just figure out the right track. We stumbled upon the way. We adjusted our approach based on what we saw. So it wasn't a success on day one. But let me pause for a second. What is the developer portal? What is Backstage? It's fairly new product category, as I mentioned, so it's good maybe to spend a bit of time explaining. So maybe just a quick show of hands. Anyone heard of developer portals before? Nice. I don't have to do a lot of explaining. Anyone heard of Backstage? Good. Anyone using it in production in their company? Nice. We've got some adopters. Yoo-hoo. Great. So yeah, I don't have to do a lot of explaining. Like, we'll just save a couple of minutes for questions then. So super quick introduction that I like to give when I describe this product to my friends, who are mostly smart people. I introduce it as like a universal layer of abstraction over all of your infrastructure, tools, APIs, documents, data points, what have you. What it solves basically is it gets like 3 main jobs done for a developer. So you can get you can spin up new components in seconds with best practices included. You can manage all of your software, all of your fleet in a centralized location, and you can explore and get insights about your ecosystem and enable collaboration across the org. The other way to explain it, maybe a bit more visual, would be this. Does it look familiar to any one of you? Yeah, I mean, that's probably like more or less typical developer laptop on a given day, and developer portal can trim it down to this. So just your code and Backstage, that's it. Everything that an engineer needs in their day-to-day that is not writing code needs to be accessed through developer portal. That's the basic idea, that's the basic philosophy. This is how we build the product. And it might look something like this. This is what it looks like at Spotify right now. This is the homepage of a developer portal that every developer lands on a day-to-day. But it took us a bit of time to get there. It wasn't on day one that it looked like that. Here is a brief timeline of Backstage evolution at Spotify. We will walk through some of the problems that it solved and how the community in Spotify helped build it. I joined, as you can see, late 2017. So yeah, not quite exactly maybe when the dinosaurs were walking by my side, but I've seen a fair bit of spreadsheets being used in the day-to-day, and I was lucky enough to witness that journey from the beginning. And the good news is that we needed less and less spreadsheets as the journey progressed. But it started quite simple. As like all the good things, it starts quite simple. So it started with a software catalog. And the software catalog, what it is basically a searchable, browsable list of all the software components at Spotify that keeps metadata code. And that's the magic of like why it's kept up to date, because first, like the metadata is owned by the service owners, and the responsibility of keeping that metadata up to date is distributed. So you get that nice federated ownership over something, and that's basically the magic that has inspired us towards a more GitOps workflows in the company. So the catalog was a good start. It helped us tremendously with finding things, but it wasn't enough. We still had technical documentation that was scattered across the place, and that was for the most part out of date. So the next thing that we looked at, and like the next top thing that developers were requesting was basically the information, the technical information about the service itself. So we decided to try docs as code approach. That is also quite common. I think we borrowed the idea from Google back then. And what it means in practice is that developers would write documentation in the markdown format. This will be stored next to the source code, once again, within your repo. And then we created a feature called tag docs that would basically allow us to access that documentation and would render every markdown file into like a nice looking web page. Developer loved it, developers raved about it. In just about a year, we went from 0 to 500,000 documents. So that was massive, massive, massive success. And in terms of like keeping this information up to date, we saw that tech docs were on average twice as fresh as like other sources of information that we had in the company. So it seemed like it worked. And since we were in the growth phase, just like I mentioned in the beginning, we had to onboard lots of developers. And that would happen frequently, and we needed to onboard our developer experience, which had a lot to be desired back in the days. So we created a thing called Golden Pass. And what this is basically a golden standard for how software is built in Spotify. We have one golden pass per discipline, so be it backend, be it, I don't know, front-end development, data pipelines, what have you. There would be always like a tailored per discipline onboarding pass for developers. The first one that we created was for backend, and it had 21 pages in it, which was quite a challenge to go through. But it's also not a criticism for the approach itself, but just for the amount of steps that you needed to take to get onboarded as a backend engineer. So when people complain about like how long the golden path is, I'm like, it's not about the golden path. It's about how tricky it is to get onboarded in your company or get up and running with something. So I do really recommend documenting your development process. It's horrifying, I guarantee you that. So over time, we condensed our golden paths, and despite shrinking, they now cover more content, and they're not only used by newbies, but also by experienced engineers when they need a refresher on something or when they're trying to get into a new discipline. So yeah, that's that. The other thing that made it even easier to adhere to the best practices was software templates. And we created software templates based on golden path. So if you follow the golden path during your onboarding, there will be like a corresponding software template that you can use. And what that sort of did to our workflow is that instead of like maybe cloning an old repository and trying to sort of modify the code, which like oftentimes this repository would be outdated, you would now just have a super simple way through like filling in the form and clicking through a couple of steps, spin up a new component, be it like a backend, be it front end, what have you. Like what it would create like a boilerplate code based on the best practices, and it would be deployed in the system of your choice. So all you had to do basically is to start creating your code on top of that. And of course, the service created through the software templates would be added to software catalog. So we created this virtual cycles of like everything you create is now standardized and everything you create is now part of catalog, which was something that platform teams really, really loved. And they created all these templates based on disciplines because that helped them to achieve standardization in their day-to-day job. Along with the tech stack and migration to cloud that we were undergoing back then, our infrastructure toil also grew. And we frequently had to go through migrations from one Java version to another, from one Python version to another. And it was really hard to do that across a massive fleet of components. And what developers would do, they would start chasing down people with spreadsheets to track the migration, and those migrations would oftentimes take months. So this idea born out of the Hack Week came up, is that we created like this, I don't know, system of widgets. We probably didn't have the word plugin even back then. And this would just like simply visualize for people what migrations they need to undertake, what actions do they need to take. And that just like gamified and streamlined and simplified process of managing migrations a lot. So yeah, that was sort of like the early days and a bit of, I guess, of the journey, like getting to Backstage where it is today. And like a good data-driven company, we were trying to sort of measure the effects of those systems and of those practices and parts of the framework as we were building them. And now when we had more of the software cycle standardized and instrumented, we had a way to compare some of the user cohorts. So what we did is that we compared Backstage users who used the system frequently and aligned like with their components aligned closely to Golden Path, with the other cohort that had maybe less alignment with Golden Path and using Backstage less frequently. And what we saw is basically from like a frequent Backstage users, you would get twice the amount of contributions. They would deploy much more often, and like the retention is likely to also be higher in this cohort. Can you imagine this in your organization with twice the code change, basically higher quality software and even better retention? So that was like a really compelling taste of ROI for what your developer experience could yield in just like business benefits. Those quantitative numbers were quite impressive and outstanding, but we also started to collect qualitative information, and that came in a form of survey. So inspired by Google, we also did a bit of like engineering satisfaction type survey where we would ask developers like all the questions related to their daily workflow and their productivity. And what we found out is that satisfaction with like the overall tooling was quite high, and Backstage was one of the most loved products. 80% of people rated it favorably, and that's the score that also continues to go strong through the years. And then what happened then is that in 2020, we decided to open source it, and we donated the framework to Cloud Native Foundation. And why we did that? We shared it because we kept talking to technology companies in like various different spaces, and they were experiencing all the same challenges. Infrastructure toil, hard to find things, hard to standardize things. So it was not just happening at Spotify, it was happening everywhere, and in fact, it's happening right now. So we decided to basically share it with the world, and CNCF was one of the trusted providers that would ensure that the software would always remain free under Linux Foundation license. The community response to Backstage was quite overwhelming. We expected that it would probably be popular. We expected that people might want to try and use it, but we didn't realize like how big of a demand this would be. So it quickly created like a really, really big and vibrant community of contributors. We were quite surprised to see enterprise companies coming in and use it, from healthcare, from government agencies, airplane companies, you name it. As it turns out, every company is now a software company, is what I take out of it. But it's a really big community, and those numbers are probably already outdated as we speak, because I need to update them every week to keep them fresh. Now, we've heard about like the origins and the problems that Backstage solved for Spotify. Now let's maybe take a little look at like what this means for a developer and like how does it change developer workflow on a daily basis. Can we do another quick show of hand? How many individual contributors do we have in this room? Like, how many people do we have writing software? If you're writing software as your daily job, nice. All right, awesome. Let's see, hopefully you can relate to some of that stuff. That would be my hope. But yeah, back to like the skill tree analogy I was trying to make at the beginning. This is a bit of like an oversimplified journey of just like one's career as a developer within a given company. Of course, we all know that reality is much more like twisted and there are some forks and turns, but like for the purpose of this exercise, let's pretend that it's linear and like very simple, just 3 stages. You go from like onboarding to maybe gaining a bit more confidence to just like expanding horizon and pushing your boundaries a little bit and trying to see what's out there. And yeah, let's start with onboarding, which is crucial but oftentimes overlooked part of the developer experience. And I'm not talking about the situation when like there is no formal onboarding even. Let's just put it aside. But even if there is like onboarding program in the company for developers, it's usually like there's a lot to be desired there. And as a new joiner, your goal is typically, or like just as simply as it can be, is to get up and running faster, like as soon as you can. You want to get onboarded, you want to feel productive, you want to feel part of the team. And what it usually takes is that like you're trying to learn companies' ways of working, you're trying to familiarize yourself with the business domain, and it's not that easy as it may seem. So what a day of an engineer onboarding to the new company might look like. You've probably been there. You start a new gig, all pumped up and excited to learn and to contribute. You feel slightly overwhelmed in a good way with like all the new faces, all the new technologies, new abbreviations. You start setting up your environment and realize that the setup guide is maybe slightly outdated and like some of the commands wouldn't work. And you need access to all these groups now and services, and like you file a ticket and wait for someone to come back to you and grant you this access. And meanwhile, your never-ending list of bookmarks just piles up, and you start to get a feeling that like if you lose those bookmarks, you will never find them again. And you decide to maybe look into, I don't know, ongoing projects and like discover some of the coding standards and guidelines, but the amount of documentation you need to process to see what's relevant for your role is also quite overwhelming. And yeah, I guess at the end of the day, you just like feel slightly irritated in the best case scenario. Many developers share that sentiment with us, that after they've been through a process like this, they've started questioning their decision of even joining this company, or they started having doubts about their abilities. What if there was a better way, right? And yeah, as you probably remember from me talking about like things like Golden Path and like various different parts of the framework that we developed along the way, there could be some solutions to this problem. And in Spotify, we've seen great amount of success with like self-service onboarding workflow, which basically Golden Path is. You don't have to file tickets to get access. You don't have to talk to 5 different teams to spin up a new service. It's all baked in as part of the Golden Path workflow. You just follow the steps. Of course, like those things also get outdated, but given the amount of people going through that journey every day, like it gets updated pretty much every week with the recent information. And creation flow is also like super straightforward. Instead of filing a ticket and like then talking to somebody, you can spin up VM from just like a scaffolder template. You can boot up a new application, and you can deploy your first service to production on day 1, if you please. And that yields quite big results in terms of overall satisfaction with the onboarding process. The other angle of attack is you want to understand your probably project domain, right? And there is something that developer portal can help with as well. Because remember, we had catalog, which was like a central source of all the information. So you could see like what are the systems that your team owns, what the related documentation, how does it fit into like the larger picture of the business, what's the domain that I'm basically getting into. And all of this is available through like all the different metadata and components linked in the software catalog next to your services. The other maybe final aspect that is usually really helpful and really crucial in the onboarding is finding your place in the work, just trying to see how your team fits into the overall picture of the organization. And that's also quite convenient within a developer portal because it has organizational information available next to your components and information about your components. So you could see like all the sister squads that maybe work in your mission or in your part of the work. You can see like how the organizational structure ladders up all the way to the top and things like that. And speaking of metrics and the impact that it had on the overall business that we've seen is like we can use this one maybe as one of the key metrics when it comes to effectiveness of developer onboarding. So we were monitoring this one quite closely, and that was time to 10th PR for a new engineer. And why 10th PR? Because that was that corresponded basically to this new hire feeling comfortable with the product that they were working on. And when we started improving developer experience, that number was way above 2 months. So it was like 60-something days. So it took like whole 2 months basically for someone to contribute their 10th PRs. And with all the improvements that we made, we were able to slim it down to 20 days. So that was kept steady at 20-ish days for recent couple of years. But it wasn't just, I guess, new hires that benefited from great developer experience. That was just, I guess, one metric that we saw particularly moving with that. But yeah, let's move to the next chapter or the next stage of a developer journey, which is, I guess, typically somewhere between 6 months to, I don't know, 1 year, but there also could be exceptions. As you gain experience with the products, you probably start to look for opportunity to drive projects. You want to, I don't know, like maybe get more operational responsibility, or like you have to get more operational responsibility on call. Yeah, this is what a typical day of life could be in this case. So basically it's, I don't know, 10 a.m. in the morning, right? You start your day. Nobody really starts your day earlier than this, where it's a good day, why rushing it, right? You pour some coffee, you check the news feed, you check PRs. Nothing seems particularly pressing. You review a couple of them, and then you probably pick up a tech spec that you started writing last week, when you were going to just like figure out the solution to activity tracking in the mobile app that your team was developing. And you were like, right, I probably need some like event collection. And I've heard there was Kafka somewhere deployed in the company, so I'll go search for that Kafka service, I guess. And then you spend a couple of hours searching for it. And finally, you maybe find a team that has some approximate relationship to Kafka, and then you book a meeting with them to figure out what is it that they do. And that's, I guess, probably the amount of progress that was made on that day when it comes to that technical spec. You're onto something, but yeah, you need to wait for that meeting to happen. Meanwhile, security team reaches out asking for some kind of estimate on security vulnerabilities that were discovered last week, and there is 26 of them, and you have no idea what's the priority and like what's the severity of those. So gotta talk to them as well. And in the meantime, the build starts failing for no particular reason, or at least not for like an obvious reason. So you just retrigger it and hope that it works. We'll see what happens. And in the meantime, it's getting late. It's 5 p.m. like time to go home and cook dinner. So yeah, that's maybe the end of the day, except for the fact that you get paged at 8 p.m. And you start digging. And that was the build that was failing. And that was the service that you touched in the last couple of days. So it's going to be a late night, perhaps. Let's see if we can help make this day any better with Developer Portal. Should we? So I guess first thing to be said here, we have catalog, right? We have templates. We have all those things. Once again, how do we prevent from being lost in sea? How do we help developers to find things in all this maze? We tie it all together. And this is what Backstage Search does. So in case of that, like Kafka, vague mention of Kafka component, or like vague mention of something that you might have overheard over coffee, there is a way to easily find it across components, clusters, data pipelines, documents, you name it, because all of this is indexed by Backstage Search. And you can search across that, and you can get in touch with the team, or you can start using the service. This is basically what our platform teams used in order to make their technology discoverable. They're trying to make it as available as possible and as documented as possible for self-serve. So that could have helped maybe some. When it comes to operational stuff, right? There is a lot to keep track of when it comes to the vitals of the systems that you own. There are security vulnerabilities, there are tests, there is uptime, I don't know, you name it. And all of this information needs to be surfaced in order for developers to act upon. And with that, developer portals can also help with like centralizing this information and bringing it to you, bringing it to where you are, basically, without breaking your flow. We have a couple of components, both proprietary and open source, that collect that type of information, security vulnerabilities, cost insights, like if you have certain cost spikes, you will get notified about them. There is a scorecard solution as well, where you can basically specify the tech vitals that you care about, and when like those standards degrade, you get notified on them. And all of this is populated into developer portal homepage, which makes it super actionable. You know exactly what you're on the hook for. You know exactly the importance of those things. And yeah, I guess last but not least, it's really, really helpful with incident management. Developer portal can really make a difference and reduce stress levels when it comes to incident management, because like when something is failing, you can clearly track the dependencies. You can see like if it's your service only that is failing, or if maybe like a dependency upstream has an incident right now. You can see exactly who is on call. You can reach out to the team and the individual who is on call, and there are a bunch of integrations available with all the main sort of incident management providers. In our case, it's PagerDuty. So that's also an integral part of the workflow in that sense. And finally, we get to the wizard stage, when you're sort of know everything and anything about your architecture and components, and or maybe you get just curious and trying to explore what's out there. Like say you're a backend developer wanting to get into UI frameworks. And oftentimes people stumble upon the questions like, how do I even do that? Like, what are the people that can help me to pair up on something or hack on something? What are the projects that exist across the company where I can get to exercise those abilities? And yeah, say like it's another day of a developer life, huh? You're basically, yeah, just trying to figure out like, how do I get in touch with like a design project within my company? I have this amazing idea of like introducing design system and design components to existing web magazine that we own. How do I do that? I need a designer. Maybe I can mentor someone on reliability, given that this is my strongest pursuit. How do I find someone who might be interested in that? It's a lot of discomfort, I guess, trying to find answers to those questions, and oftentimes you go through a manager, but they also have limited amount of information that might be sort of within the boundaries of your team still. And say you finally get something that might be of your interest, that is, I don't know, leading a big project in the backend space, which involves, I don't know, huge runtime changes across 4 or 5 different teams or 50 different teams. You might also start wondering, like, how do I go about that? How do I go about all this coordination? How do I stay on top of those changes? It becomes like a really challenging thing to do. So that probably will leave you somewhat puzzled, right? But there are solutions. It's not a magic bullet, but there's something we can do with the developer portal. So even though career growth and developer portal might sound like counterintuitive things when you put it together in one sentence, but as a matter of fact, it's quite successful to have like your internal talent marketplace of sorts close to your developers or within your developer portal. This is something that was born out of Hack Week, once again, where basically we were trying to just like find people interested in your ideas and in your hacks. And then it evolved into like this big internal marketplace that creates possibilities for people to connect on mentoring opportunities, to connect on temporary placement in a team. So you can basically just go and explore what's out there. Maybe someone needs a backend engineer to help with like implementation of something, or maybe someone needs like a hand with large language models. And all of this information is immediately put on Marketplace, and we've seen quite a bit of success with that within Spotify and within our cohort of adopters in the open source. So when it comes to rolling out changes at scale, like this situation where you need to like suddenly upgrade Java 16 to Java 17, or you need to roll out a small change across hundreds of teams within the company, it usually takes a bit of time to plan, execute, follow through, involve some spreadsheets. But there are solutions to that as well, which is, in our case, what we call fleet shift. It's an automatic way to roll out large refactorings or changes across your fleet. It creates a bit of there are, of course, prerequisites to that, and I'm not going to go super deep in this because this part of the framework is also like maybe an hour worth of conversation on its own. But the basic principle is that once your fleet of components adheres to certain technical standards, you can upgrade them with automatic PRs. And what this means in our case is that an author of the change just basically brings a Docker image to the platform team, and the platform team rolls out those changes on behalf of the author and creates automatic PRs that just like go to the respective teams that own the components, and then they can decide whether to merge them or not. And this is how we run right now more than 80% of our fleet at Spotify, mostly backend components and data services. And one of the examples of like the impact that it had lately is that we had one of the quite big and like impactful vulnerabilities, Log4j vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed. And it took us 9 hours to address that vulnerability with the fleet management versus days with the rest of 20% of our software. So yeah. As you have hopefully seen by now, there are many ways and many angles to tackle when it comes to developer productivity. And Spotify is a dominant force in the audio space just because we move fast, we learn fast, we fail fast. And this is rooted in our long history of improving developer experience. As we gaze into the future, as Spotify, as a technology community, we really want to raise the bar for developer experience across the board. And given that given the role that Backstage played in our journey, we want more and more companies to be able to benefit from it. Hence, we were making fairly large contributions to the open source project and trying to sort of improve the time to get up and running with the developer portal. So our main goal right now is to make it as easy as possible for any company to onboard and start using developer portal to see those gains and to see those benefits. And many people who might have checked this project at the beginning might be sort of under the impression that it requires a fair amount of technical knowledge to get up and running. But it's improving quite rapidly given the contributions that we made last year. And for someone who is not familiar with the project yet or haven't been involved with the community, check it out. It's a pretty vibrant community in terms of pace. There's a lot of sharp people and really experienced platform engineers, UI engineers, designers, what have you. So all of the problems will probably get sorted quite rapidly with the support of that community. We're on GitHub, we're on Discord. We have community sessions. Check those out. And also building on the open source contributions to Backstage, we created this new version of basically opinionated Spotify portal, which is Backstage in a box, as we call them. And it should be, the basic idea is that it should be the easiest way to get up and running in minutes instead of maybe hours. And we just launched it end of April, and we're looking for partners to explore it with us and making it better in the early closed beta. So check it out if you're curious, get in touch. We're looking for some beta testers here. And with that said, I guess thank you, and time for questions.